Imagine you're a high-ranking official at the Bank of England in 1992. You have the entire wealth of a global empire at your fingertips and the absolute certainty that no single person could ever challenge your power. Then a phone call comes in. A man named George Soros has just bet $10 billion that you are going to fail. By the time the sun set on September 16, 1992, the British government was on its knees. Billions of taxpayer pounds had vanished, and interest rates had been hiked twice in a single afternoon, a move that pushed thousands of families toward bankruptcy. It was a day of absolute slaughter on the trading floors, now known as Black Wednesday. But for George Soros, it was just another day at the office. He didn't just win a bet. He broke a nation's pride and walked away with $1 billion in profit in less than 24 hours. This isn't just a story about money. It's a story about how one man's cold, calculated logic overthrew a global superpower. To understand how Soros did it, you have to realize he didn't learn finance in a classroom. He learned it by surviving. Born György Schwarz in Hungary in 1930, Soros lived through the German occupation by using forged identity papers. His father, Tivadar, was a lawyer who cleverly changed the family name to Soros, a palindrome that means next in line in Hungarian and will soar in Esperanto to provide protective camouflage. Soros once remarked that this experience taught him the most valuable lesson of his life, that the official version of reality is often a lie. After the war, he moved to London, working as a railway porter and a waiter to put himself through the London School of Economics. It was there he studied under the philosopher Karl Popper and developed his secret weapon, the theory of reflexivity. Most economists believe markets are rational, but Soros believed they were a psychological feedback loop. He realized that if you could find a gap between what a government said was true and what was actually happening, you could exploit that gap to collapse an entire system. By 1990, Britain joined the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, or the ERM. This was a semi-fixed exchange rate system designed to stabilize European currencies. The goal was to tie the British pound to the German mark. But there was a hidden trap, known as the impossible trinity. You cannot have a fixed exchange rate, free capital movement, and an independent monetary policy all at once. Germany had just reunified, and its central bank, the Bundesbank, hiked interest rates to record highs to control inflation. Because the pound was pegged to the mark, Britain was forced to follow suit. While Germany was booming, Britain was in a deep recession with skyrocketing unemployment and a housing market collapse. The government was trapped. They had to keep interest rates high to please Europe, even though those rates were killing their own citizens. Soros wasn't just watching the UK. He saw the cracks spreading across the continent. Just days before the attack on the pound, the Italian lira had already buckled under the pressure. Soros realized the entire European project was leaning on a single, fragile pillar, the British pound. If the pound fell, the whole system would shatter. He began building a wolf pack of speculators, including titans like Paul Tudor Jones and Stanley Druckenmiller. They realized the Bank of England was running out of ammunition, their foreign currency reserves used to buy back pounds. Soros increased his bet to a staggering $10 billion, more than the Bank of England actually had in its available reserves at the time. The pressure reached a breaking point on September 15th when Helmut Schlesinger, the head of the German Bundesbank, gave a small, almost accidental interview. He suggested that some European currencies might need realignment. In the world of high finance, that one word was a dinner bell. It was the signal Soros needed. Germany would not step in to save the British. That night, Soros told his head trader to go for the jugular. On the morning of Wednesday, September 16th, the London markets opened to a wall of sell orders so intense that Bank of England officials were buying £300 million every few minutes. By 10:30 a.m., the government desperately hiked interest rates from 10% to 12%. The market didn't buy it. They saw it as a sign of total weakness. Soros didn't stop. He doubled down. At 2 p.m., the government triggered the nuclear option, announcing a hike to 15%. This is where the human tragedy of Black Wednesday truly begins. In the early 90s, most British families had variable rate mortgages. When that 15% rate hit the news, people literally stopped what they were doing and stared at their TVs in silence. For a middle-class family with a modest home, that hike meant their monthly mortgage payment had effectively doubled in the span of 4 hours. It was a localized economic earthquake. Thousands of people knew in that moment that they would lose their homes. While the traders in Canary Wharf were popping champagne, regular citizens in the suburbs were calculating how many weeks they had before the bank seized their keys. In the war room at the Treasury, Chancellor Norman Lamont and Prime Minister John Major realized the game was up. By 5 p.m., the Bank of England was dry, having spent 40% of its reserves in a futile effort. At 7 p.m., Lamont stood before the press, looking haunted, to announce Britain was surrendering and leaving the ERM. The next morning, the pound plummeted 15% against the German mark and 25% against the dollar. George Soros woke up to $1 billion in profit. While he was branded a villain who stole from taxpayers, he argued he was simply an observer of an unsustainable system. Ironically, the crash actually led to an economic recovery for the UK, as the lower pound made exports cheaper and interest rates finally dropped. However, the political damage was permanent. It destroyed the Conservative government's reputation for economic competence and fueled the Euroscepticism that would eventually lead to Brexit. The public never forgot that the government was willing to sacrifice their homes to defend a currency peg that was doomed from the start. One of the most fascinating details of that day was that Soros was actually asleep in New York, while the most intense trading happened in London. He had left instructions for his team to go for the jugular, knowing that his theory of reflexivity had already set the collapse in motion. The Bank of England lost an estimated £3.3 billion of taxpayer money that day, money that essentially moved directly into the pockets of Soros and his fellow speculators. This event didn't just change the UK, it changed how every central bank in the world operated. They realized that in a world of instant communication and massive private hedge funds, the old tools of state control were becoming obsolete. It was the birth of a new era of finance, where the individual could truly become more powerful than the state. The fallout also changed the map of Europe. Before Black Wednesday, many believed a single European currency was inevitable and that every nation would fall in line. After the pound's collapse, Sweden, Finland, and several other nations were forced to devalue or float their currencies. It was the first time the market had successfully staged a coup against a political vision. To this day, the events of 1992 serve as a warning to any government that tries to fight the laws of supply and demand with political promises. George Soros proved that when the truth is at stake, the man with the most conviction and the biggest bankroll usually wins.